Hey everyone, I'm trying to figure out how I can do at least a little work because we have 2 new kittens and they are running around everywhere. So you may well hear some meowing, some hissing from our older cat, various pouncing and jingling noises in the background. So that's what that is, it's kittens. But I've got to figure out a way to work in which I can record videos and do the other things that I like to do, while also supervising 2 new kittens. So, yeah, this is it. Oh god, there's so much going on at the moment. But what I think I will choose to talk about, at least for today, is a hoary old chestnut. A hill I have chosen to die on, and that is the definition of socialism, because I am absolutely fed up, sick to the back teeth with the way in which people keep getting it wrong, misunderstanding it, mistaking socialism for communism, and communism for the various supposedly Marxist regimes that have popped up. And they're just definitionally wrong, and you can inform them, you can point them to definitions, you can point them to definitions by conservative political philosophers, even, such as Roger Scruton, who died last year, I think. But you can point them to that and they will still persist and insist on getting it wrong. Now, this whole problem is in no way helped by the fact that Marxists themselves redefined socialism. Socialism pre-exists Marxism. It's a much older idea. In many ways, it's a natural outgrowth of liberalism, though obviously there are differences later on. I'm not talking. Most people are not talking about the Marxist definition of socialism when they talk about socialism. In Marxism, it's one of the stages of history. It's a social and economic system that's supposed to be transitional between capitalism and communism, where everything is controlled by the state. Right? The state being the embodiment of the people, and the idea being that by taking control of absolutely everything, it's held in the commons, and then gradually the state is supposed to disappear, and then everything is just simply held in the commons with no intermediary. Right, so that's this control of the means of production that you hear bandied about. But that's not the definition of socialism when you're talking about it as its own ideology. Socialism in that sense is extremely broad, but can be defined by 3 guiding principles, and these are definitionally what socialism is. The belief in equality. Now, it's necessary to qualify that these days by saying that it's about equal opportunity, egalitarianism, equality before the law, not everyone being the same, not everything and everyone being homogeneous or getting exactly the same thing. Any inequalities have to be justified, that's the point, and that everyone should be treated, insofar as is possible, the same. So a rich person shouldn't have any advantage in the courts, for example. You shouldn't have any particular special rights because you belong to any particular group or any particular hierarchical aspect, right? So any inequality that does exist must be justified. That's it, really. The second core plank of socialism, believe it or not, is that the state must be limited, that its role is that of administrator. So it's not the legal and ceremonial manifestation of civil society, but is purely administrative. So it is there only to guarantee those individual entitlements to distribute benefits amongst the citizens accordingly. So its primary concern is with distribution and the maintenance of institutions. So the idea is that the state is purely administrative and seeks to ensure that everyone has enough food, medicine, education, recreation, and so on available to them on terms that are as equal as possible. Alright, and the law is enforced evenly and fairly, and everyone has equal access to even and fair legal rulings and so forth. So the state is confined to administrative functions. It's not set up to propagate religious doctrine, nationalist ideology, or anything similar. It is there purely in the role of administrator and limited to that role of administration. And the third main plank of socialism is the elimination of systems of control. So socialism, not Marxism, socialism is inherently anti-hierarchical. It seeks to eliminate systems of control, hierarchies, to do away with class systems, racial hierarchies, and political institutions that grant certain people more power than others, hereditary privileges, all of those kind of things. All such systems violate that fundamental idea of equality. Most socialists don't agree with Marxist theory that all private property is a form of control, but would say that it needs to be limited, regulated to prevent exploitation, lying in advertising, harm to the environment, harm to people, adulterating ingredients in food, for example, or failing to meet basic food standards. So this goes back to the administrative role. Anti-hierarchical is innate to socialism. So if you see something authoritarian, it cannot properly be said to be socialist, at least not in the sense of socialism as its own ideology. And it is important to get this right, so that you are not arguing against straw men. If you find yourself pissed off because you're of a more conservative or libertarian bent and people keep calling you Nazis, you should understand this. You want to be argued with on the basis of what you actually believe and the proper definitions of what you actually believe, and so as not to be a hypocritical asshole, you should extend that same understanding, that same idea, that same desire to be accurate in your language to others. But instead we consistently and constantly see this strawmanning, this conflation of socialism with communism and communism with the authoritarian states that we saw. But as we can see from the definition of socialism, those authoritarian states that dressed up in the skin of Marxism were hierarchical and authoritarian, and therefore cannot be socialist, because socialism, as one of its three central planks, according to Roger Scruton and most other analysts, one of its three central planks is the elimination of systems of control, of ideas like the party or dictatorship. Grok that. Grok it in fullness. Read some of the criticisms that Marxist theorists had of socialists, and understand that the Marxist definition of socialism is different. And just as you don't like to be called a Nazi for your beliefs, you should understand and accept that socialists don't like to be lumped together with authoritarian, pantomime Marxist regimes of the past, because they're not the same thing at all. They weren't even communist, but they're not the same thing at all. So then you get people herping and derping and asking you where it's been successful, where it's been tried, everywhere in the modern first world. In fact, you could say that socialism, to one degree or another, is a prerequisite to being considered a first world country. Everywhere except America has some sort of universal healthcare, a socialist principle. Everywhere has some form of welfare to try and stop at least the majority of people falling into abject penury. That's a socialist idea. In theory, We have equality before the law, legal aid, all of those kind of things. Those are all socialist ideas. And the most socialist countries, the Scandinavian countries, with their decentralized politics, with their strong welfare states, with their investments in education, with their idea of reform in the prison system, and their ending of homelessness in places like Finland, for example, the happiest, best places to live on Earth are the ones with the most social investment, the greatest equality, the greatest capacity to move between social classes. Contrary to what you might believe, it's not America where you can go from rags to riches. It's places like Denmark and Norway and Sweden and Finland. Those places where they have that equal access to education, where they have a welfare floor that you can't drop beneath, where they have that investment, a genius born into poverty is far more likely to succeed there than a genius born into poverty in the United States, or increasingly the United Kingdom, though we retain our NHS at least. So if you like all of those ideas, those things, access to education, the ability to rise meritocratically, a floor beneath which your society says no one shall fall, support when you need it, social investment when you need it, a reforming prison system that's far more effective than a punishment or a profit-based prison system, you're a socialist. And yes, those countries are overwhelmingly socialist, despite what some of their politicians might say. Because socialism isn't what you think it is. It isn't this straw man that you've built up. It is probably the absolute most successful political system for encouraging human flourishing and allowing the best chance, the most equal chance, for anyone to succeed and progress in life. So do what you want other people to do. You want them to understand your ideology, your genuine positions, not to strawman you. Well, do that for socialists. If something fails to meet a definition, then it is not that thing. A lime is not a lemon. A socialist is not a Marxist, or a communist, or an authoritarian. Indeed, definitionally, they cannot be an authoritarian. A fish isn't a bicycle, a bed isn't a chair, a cat isn't a dog. This should be obvious, and yet somehow it escapes people. So grok it, understand it, internalize it. Thanks.